Welcome to Topics in Digital Economics. My name is Paul Belflamme. This presentation is about the trade of personal data and differential pricing. Differential pricing is the practice by which a firm sets different prices for different consumers and for the same product or service. Let's start with the context. Nowadays, there are two big trends in our economies. One is called datafication, the other one is called digitization. Datafication refers to the idea that more and more aspects of our lives are turned into data and later transferred into information. And digitization is the process of converting information into a digital format, a computer-readable format. So combining datafication and digitization, you have the creation of huge amounts of data, which are called big data. And once you couple big data with data science and artificial intelligence, you can extract value from this data, which is coming from so many different sources. Now, if there is value, there is potential for trade, and there are potentially data markets with a supply side and a demand side. On the supply side, you've got two big categories of agents: data brokers and digital platforms. Data brokers, probably you never heard of those names, but these companies have probably heard of your name, and they know your name and many other things about you. As for the digital platforms, you know their name, and they probably know as much as the data brokers about you. So they amass a lot of data about consumers, and of course there is a demand for such data coming from commercial firms, which may use this data to improve the production process, to enhance their value proposition or to target advertising, but also to customize prices, and this is what we want to discuss here. So what is the difference made by artificial intelligence and this huge collection of data that is taking place nowadays? Well, Emmanuel Combe here is summarizing quite well the revolution we are witnessing. So let's read the quote together. He says, "The individual data collected by companies already existed before the digital age, but focused on specific aspects of their profile or behavior. In addition, they were mainly based on observed consumption data or purchase history. Digital technology is changing the situation. Companies can continuously collect varied data on the same individual and their environment through multiple channels. Cross-referencing this data makes it possible to draw up a fairly accurate composite portrait of each individual in terms of their own characteristics and behavior, and to approach their maximum willingness to pay." So in a nutshell, the quality of the information collection and the capacity to cross-reference data from different sources allow firms now to have a pretty good idea of what consumers are willing to pay for a particular product or service. Okay, if you want to take some time and pause the video here, you can have a look at this infographics here, which explains how a data broker like Axiom is able to collect data from so many different sources, and by cross-referencing this data have a very good idea of who consumers are, what they like, what they're likely to buy, and at which price. Okay, and similarly for digital platforms, here is just a number of titles you can see in the press, all of them showing the kind of possibilities that these digital platforms have to gain a better knowledge of the consumers. And not just digital platforms, but also brick and mortar ones, as is shown here with Walmart. Okay, so what are the implications of these big trends for the economic analysis? Well, the first is that personalized pricing, so having different prices for each individual, this is becoming a true possibility. And in the theory, microeconomic theory so far, it was just presented as a theoretical benchmark. So now we need to look at this as a true possibility. Second things, more firms have access to differential pricing. So the technologies to collect data and infer information about consumers, these technologies are becoming available for a larger set of firms. And so the possibility exists that competing firms within an industry are all able somehow to profile their consumers. So we need, from an economic theory point of view, we need to understand better what happens when competing firms use differential pricing. Now, a third point which is very important is that these technologies we're talking about can also be used by consumers to somehow protect their personal data and protect their privacy. And so from a modeling point of view, again, we need to give a more active role to consumers. They are not just kind of automaton who decide whether to buy or not. They may also make decisions that affect the capacity that firms have to learn the profile of these consumers. And finally, we need also to look at other players like digital platforms or data brokers, which somehow play the role of input suppliers, data suppliers, to firms, which later will use this data about their consumers to refine the forms of differential pricing that they are using. Okay, so in the rest of this presentation, I just want to go quickly through two pieces of research that I've been doing with co-authors over the last years, which contribute somehow to these different issues. The first one is focused on the first and the third point. So the fact that personalized pricing becomes a possibility, and the fact also that consumers have the possibility themselves to protect their privacy. Okay, and so the model I'm referring to here is a model I wrote with Walter Vergroot, and we published this in Economics Letters. So we look at a monopoly, a single firm in a particular market that has some possibility to identify the willingness to pay of consumers and thereby set for them personalized prices. But at the same time, we also give the possibility to consumers to hide somehow, to make sure that the monopoly will not be able to observe their identity or their willingness to pay. Okay, so maybe what do we have in mind here? How can consumers hide themselves? Well, you probably know that, and you're probably applying this yourself. There are different obfuscation strategies that you can use by simply clearing the cookies on your web browser or deleting your browser history after some point. Okay? Or you may refuse to provide information that you find is not relevant to a transaction, or you may even use an alias or a different email address so that you cannot be tracked. Okay, so these are measures you can take, or you can go one step further and use technologies that will enhance your privacy, and you've got some examples here. Okay, now the possibility exists, and you may ask yourself whether you're using them or not. And according to some surveys that have been done in the US, people say that they care about their privacy, but they don't seem to act too much about that, feeling first that they may not have too much control, or because there is a cost of doing this. This is not that easy. Of course, I'm not talking about change in regulations like the GDPR, which has changed a lot, but in general, consumers don't seem to use too much these possibilities, and there may be a good reason for that, as we will discuss in a minute. Now, coming back to the model, the research question is the following: do consumers benefit from the possibility of hiding? Well, at first glance, we should say yes. Why? Because, well, this is not hard to understand that if a monopolist, so a single firm on the market, knows the consumers better, this firm is in a position to extract higher prices, to make people pay higher prices, prices that are closer to their maximum willingness to pay, what is called their pain point. Okay, so a priori this is bad news for consumers, and so they would prefer to hide, and so we would expect that if they are given the possibility of hiding, they should benefit from lower prices, and it should be good news for them. But actually it's not. Okay, and we show that the availability of the hiding technology, even if the cost of this technology is very low, this availability often reduces the consumer surplus, so the well-being of consumers in general in this market. And the intuition can be explained in a few words. So remember, in this model, the monopoly has some probability to identify the willingness to pay of consumers. And if the monopoly does identify the consumers, then the monopoly will quote a price which is just equal or just below the maximum willingness to pay of the consumers. For the consumers that the monopolist doesn't profile, then the monopolist will set what we call the regular price, which is the same for everyone. Now, if a consumer decides to use the hiding technology, well, this consumer knows that she will pay this regular price because the firm will not be in a position to identify her willingness to pay. Now, even if a consumer hides, she still reveals something about herself. She reveals actually that she belongs to the consumers with a high willingness to pay. Okay? Why? Because the monopolist understands that those consumers with a high willingness to pay will lose a lot if they are recognized. A lot with respect to what they would pay if they were hidden and if they were just paying the same regular price as everyone. Okay, so those consumers who have the most to win by hiding themselves are consumers with a high willingness to pay. Okay, and so this is a kind of information that the monopolist gains by observing who is hiding, and that gives an incentive to the monopolist to raise the regular price. Okay, and another reason for raising the regular price is that it also discourages consumers from hiding. Okay, so at the end of the day, if consumers have the possibility to hide, the monopolist will have an incentive to raise the regular price, and so on average, consumers will pay higher prices, and this is why, on aggregate, consumers are worse off because of the availability of this hiding technology. Okay, so things are certainly not clear here, and we need to be careful when we want to draw a conclusion a bit too fast. We need to go and see further and see how the behavior of the firms will change when consumers have the possibility to hide. Now, let me come to the second model, which looks at the other two issues. We have in the second model a competition between firms. We'll have two firms, and they both have access to differential pricing. And we also want to draw some conclusion about the upstream market where data are sold or given to the two firms that are competing on the market. Okay, so we've got duopolists. Like in the first model, these duopolists have the possibility to set personalized prices with some probability. So with some probability they will recognize consumers, and then they will set a price as close as possible to their pain points. But with the complementary probability, they're not able to profile the consumer, and then they set a regular price. Okay, and so in this setting, which is a work that I've done with Winlam and Watervergroot, published in Marketing Science. In this work, we also try to understand the incentive that data brokers have to supply data to the duopolists. Okay, so maybe I'll be a bit shorter here. The question is really, how does the firm's ability to profile consumers affect price competition? Okay, and a priori, and from previous literature, we know that this is hard to know from the outset, because there are two conflicting forces. Okay, one force is the one we had in the monopoly setting. If the firms know their consumers better, they are in a position to set higher prices because they can set prices closer to the willingness to pay of the consumers. But what changes when there is competition is that competition may become more intense, at least for some consumers. Instead of fighting for the average consumer as they do when they set the same price for everyone, now firms, when they have the possibility to personalize prices, will actually move competition towards each and every individual consumer. Okay, and so the consumers which are relatively indifferent between the offering of the two firms, well, these consumers will actually benefit from lower prices because the two firms, as they know who these consumers are, will fight quite fiercely with personalized prices in order to attract the custom of these customers. Okay, so there are two forces working in opposite direction. One is the same as in the monopoly setting, which allow firms to set higher prices, but the second one is an intensification of competition, which drives firms to set lower prices. Now, there is a number of theoretical results that suggest that the second force is stronger than the first force. And so at the end of the day, firms will actually use differential pricing, and that will lead on average to lower prices, which may lead also to lower profits for the firms. So it's a form of prisoner dilemma. They use the data and they use differential pricing because this is their dominant strategy. Whatever the other firm does, they have an interest in doing so. But because they both do so at equilibrium, they are kind of trapped in a prisoner dilemma. They would prefer actually if there was some rule preventing them from using differential pricing. Okay, but the important result is that in these settings, consumers on average are better off because they benefit from this increased competition. Now, in our paper, we show that this is not always true. Okay, and part of the reason why we get a different result is that we are not comparing full personalized pricing and uniform pricing. We look at all possibilities in between because we have this probabilistic technology that firms have to recognize consumers. Okay, and the message in our paper is that consumers actually do suffer from being profiled by firms when firms have asymmetric abilities to profile them. Okay, so I'll go quickly here. Our model is just an extension of the Bertrand model. So remember, this is a model where two firms produce exactly the same product, and so consumers choose whichever product is the cheapest. Okay, but what we add here is what we had already in the first paper, which is that consumers can be profiled by any firm with some probability. Okay, and with complementary probability, they remain anonymous. Okay, and firms can charge a personalized price to these consumers that they manage to profile, and otherwise they set a uniform price for the anonymous consumers. In this paper, consumers don't have access to any hiding technology. Okay. Let me skip the details here, just give you the main result, which is that if both firms can profile consumers, but do not always profile the same consumers, then they gain market power. So they escape this, what is called the Bertrand Paradox, such that prices would actually be equal to marginal cost and firms wouldn't make any economic profit. Okay, so this is still the result if only one firm can profile consumers, or if both firms profile exactly the same set of consumers. But if we are not in this situation, then they can regain some market power, they can make positive economic profits, and this of course decreases the surplus, the well-being of the consumers. Okay, the intuition may not be that easy to understand, but just to cut a long story short, when firms don't have exactly the same profiling abilities, they kind of use this to raise prices, to coordinate, not to compete too much. Okay. Now, what are the implications? And I will end here. Well, this means that there is a demand for data from the firms, okay? And data brokers will actually supply data or data analytics to both firms as long as they don't supply them with exactly the same data. And for the same reason, one of the firms could actually share the data it has about consumers with the other firm. Okay, as long, I repeat, that firms end up with different abilities to profile consumers. Now, facing that, consumers would certainly be better off if firms were forced to list, to make public the regular price. And so if consumers are receiving a personalized price because they've been profiled, and this personalized price is higher than the list price, then they can always say, no, no, I am not paying the personalized price, I will pay the public list price. In that case, firms will again be forced to compete very fiercely, and prices will go down to the marginal cost. Okay? Otherwise, if these list prices are not public, and so if we are in the model we have described, then it's not clear if consumers suffer or benefit from the fact that firms overall can profile them better. Okay, so it could be actually that an improved profiling could globally be welfare enhancing for the consumers. Okay, so again, it's not clear that there is always a demand for privacy coming from the consumers. Right, so it's time to wrap it up. First takeaway, datification and digitization enable firms to improve differential pricing. Firms compete with differential pricing with ambiguous impacts on their profits. It's not always at equilibrium profitable for firms to use differential pricing, but they are in a prisoner's dilemma in many environments. Then some consumers pay more because firms can identify their pain point, but other consumers pay less because they are now at the center of an increased competition. And finally, data brokers tend to provide competing firms with distinct data analytics. Okay, so this is a very important topic which deserves a lot of research, and there is increasing research there. I just brushed the surface a little bit. If you're interested to read more on this blog post, I am presenting the first paper I described in a non-formal way. Otherwise, just send me an email and I can point you to interesting literature. That's it for now, and I thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.